The first season of a TV show is usually the worst. Seinfeld, The Office, Parks and Rec, Star Trek, The Next Generation, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There are countless shows that started off mediocre in season 1 and then became great in season 2 onwards. Even for some of the greatest shows ever made, like Breaking Bad, the first season is the weakest. The Sopranos, arguably the greatest TV show ever made, or, at least, tied with The Wire, had a relatively great first season. Most of the characters arrived fully formed, James Gandolfini's performance was captivating from the jump, and some of the show's most memorable storylines appeared in season 1. But there are some details that people have forgotten about The Sopranos season 1, like Tony's surprising degree of remorse and Uncle Junior's unexpected talent in the bedroom. The Sopranos hadn't quite found the right tone in the pilot episode. TV pilots are really tricky to pull off, because you have to create something entirely from scratch that can ideally be repeated over and over again more than 100 times. You have to create characters and a world that audiences are going to want to come back to for years and years to come, and you have to do it all in under an hour, half an hour in some cases. Usually, it takes TV shows a few episodes to find their feet and establish their voice, and that's the case with The Sopranos. From its very first episode, The Sopranos was a radically different kind of TV show. It was darker, weirder, and more cinematic than anything else on television. But when you go back and rewatch the pilot now, the tone doesn't feel quite right. It's more of a quirky dark comedy than the gritty crime drama with elements of dark humor that it would soon become. Tony was attracted to Dr. Melfi from the beginning. Throughout the entire series, Tony and Dr. Melfi had a long, complicated relationship. To say that it pushed the boundaries of a professional therapist-patient dynamic would be an understatement. Depending on his mood, he would threaten her, proposition her, and/or confess a heinous crime to her during their sessions. The show leaned more on the romantic side of their relationship in later years, not only Tony's attraction to Dr. Melfi, but her confusing and undeniable attraction to him. But that attraction was there from the very beginning, from the moment the Prozac she prescribed him started affecting his sex drive. Tony would keep making advances at Dr. Melfi for the rest of the series, but it started in season 1. The Sopranos are actually a functional family in the early episodes. By the end of the series, it was tough to get all 4 Sopranos in a room together. Tony and Carmela's marriage was on and off through the back end of the show's run, and Meadow and AJ both turned against both of their parents at various different points. But in season 1, the Sopranos are a surprisingly functional family. They all live together, they all spend quality time together, and they actually sit down to eat dinner as a family. These early episodes did a great job of setting the show apart by combining the relatable foibles of an Italian-American family drama with the pulpy tropes of the gangster genre. We were first introduced to Tony through his soft spot for animals. Tony had very few redeeming qualities in The Sopranos. He's an unfaithful husband, a lackluster father, and, worst of all, a murderer. But the genius of the writing, and of Gandolfini's performance, is that Tony still has glimmers of humanity to keep you endeared to him despite the terrible things he does for a living. One of Tony's few sympathetic qualities was his soft spot for animals. He had a cavalier attitude toward taking human lives, but he actually cared about the animal kingdom. He was furious when Christopher killed Adriana's dog, and he cared more about Ralphie's racehorse Pyomai than Ralph himself ever did. What most people forget is that this love of animals was the first thing we learned about Tony. In the pilot episode, we were introduced to Tony fawning over a family of ducks in his pool. The imaginary woman storyline takes a fantastical turn. In the penultimate episode of season 1, Isabella, The Sopranos took a strangely fantastical turn. The show had a couple of supernatural storylines like this, but they usually involved Lynchian dream sequences, like Big Pussy's confession at the fish market or the coma dream episodes. Isabella is practically a gonzo psychological thriller in the vein of Jacob's Ladder or Shutter Island. Tony spends the whole episode bonding with an Italian exchange student named Isabella, who's supposedly house-sitting for the Cusamanos while they're on vacation. But when the Cusamanos return and they've never heard of Isabella, Tony realizes she was a lithium-induced hallucination. Dr. Melfi theorizes that his mind created the perfect maternal figure, but the show took the strangest route possible to make that point. Tony is oddly remorseful in season 1. The Tony we know from the later seasons is a cold-blooded killer, but in season 1, he's actually torn up about the horrible things he has to do. He shows more hesitation when he kills the rat in the first season than when he kills Christopher in the final season. In season 1, he makes absolutely sure he has to kill someone before reluctantly going through with it. But, just like the audience, he got desensitized over time. HBO were trepidatious about showing Tony kill people at all, so his season 1 era remorse may have been a compromise by the writers to make him more sympathetic in the early episodes. Then, when it became clear that the audience didn't care whether Tony was sympathetic, they made him more of a monster. There's a whole episode about Uncle Junior's oral sex habits. In its first season, The Sopranos dedicated a whole episode to Uncle Junior's cunnilingus skills. That's not the whole episode, per se. The A-plot concerns Meadows' soccer coach getting tangled up with the DeMeo crime family, and Tony's malleable sense of justice, but there is a lot of screen time dedicated to subtle digs and double entendres directed at Junior. The episode speaks to a larger cultural taboo around men performing oral sex on their female partners. There's a childish idea among some male circles that giving a woman pleasure isn't manly, and the fact that Junior is still holding on to that childish idea in his twilight years, and letting that masculine insecurity ruin a perfectly good relationship, is as hilarious as it is heartbreaking. The Sopranos doesn't really become The Sopranos until episode 5.